This landmark from destruction. Good evening. I'm Warner Saunders.
And I'm Joan Esposito. It was a heartbreaking sight. More than 100 years of history up in smoke.
I hate to see that done because this is, to me, was a great landmark.
Could it have been avoided? Some residents are pointing the blame at the state.
NBC5's Phil Rogers is live at 111th and Cottage Grove with that story. Phil.
Warner, there it is. All that's left tonight of the master headquarters of what was to have been the master community of Chicago. All gone now. The state had planned to turn this into a modern transportation museum. And tonight, many of the residents of this community who watched with heartbreak as the building burned last night are wondering why more had not already been done. It's easy to understand the frustration of residents of this neighborhood as they watched the building burn. Jim Thompson announced this program back when he was governor, and there have been few outward signs of progress ever since.
They were moving forward. Unfortunately, with some governmental things, it just never moves as fast as you want it to move.
Governor Edgar said today that the lack of outward signs of progress was easily explained.
We've had limited funds. It's not that dollars haven't been spent wisely, they just haven't been spent because we didn't have them. During the early 90s, the state was basically broke, and we really weren't in a position to do renovation.
State records show that since 1991, a total of nearly $8.4 million has been appropriated or spent for the Pullman project. The biggest expenditures, $1.3 million for the purchase of the property in 1991, and a whopping $3.8 million for renovation of the administration building, which burned last night. Keith Herron is with the State Preservation Agency.
We did then spend $1 million, or probably the Clocktower and the North Factory probably would have been on the ground already.
Leaders of the historic Pullman Foundation told us today they were satisfied the state had been doing all it could. They agree the fire possibly was simply one of those things which could not have been avoided.
And, you know, things do happen, but I think with all the care that people were taking, they were proceeding with all due pace to stabilize the building, that it was just an accident or something that happened that was beyond all of the people's controls down here.
Well, they are the experts here, and they say they are satisfied that the state was doing everything it could. Now, a man has been taken into custody who was in the building last night and who reportedly took credit for setting the fire. But no charges have been placed yet. We are told there will be no charges tonight pending a lineup and a roundup of more witnesses. Live at the fire scene, Phil Rogers, NBC5, Chicago.
Thanks very much, Phil. Plans were in the works to preserve the landmark structure as a transportation museum that would bring to life Pullman's rich history. The question tonight is, have those plans gone up in smoke? More now on that from NBC5's Phil Walters.
This was the heart of George Pullman's dream, the company of the ultimate company town, from which all that is ugly, discordant, and demoralized is eliminated, George Pullman said. Not even a tavern.
No, he was not trying to create a utopia. That's a misnomer. He figured that the way to get better workers and away from the bad influences of the city where they could be radicalized was to bring them out to a little country area.
And isolate them?
And isolate it, as a matter of fact. Wages were down, cut by the company, but the company wouldn't cut the rent. And so they blew up.
An ugly strike in 1894 for the first time pitted American troops against American labor, killing workers, destroying rail unions for nearly a half-century. But even with the historic mill gone, the town remains. And if Chicago has failed to pay due respect, the rest of the world has.
From Japan, from Europe, from Africa, from...
Why do they come?
Well, because Pullman is so unique in the world. It's probably the most complete industrial town anywhere in the world, and it's still alive, and it's still living.
So even if this old railroad car mill must be leveled, there's still a hotel down here with a restaurant and a museum and streets to walk that will take you back to $1.50 a day wages and industrial barons who could have the President of the United States summon troops against their workers. Live in Pullman, Phil Walters, NBC5, Chicago.
Thank you, Phil. Our coverage of the Pullman fire and the investigation will continue on the news at 10.
Workers lived